Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hello. Hi. Just
Yeah.
saying, my name's Ruby Nissim,
Yeah.
and I'm just about to interview my grandma, who's called Linda Nissim. Blah blah blah. Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise known as Queenie.
Hello, I am Ruby Nissim, and I am about to interview my lovely grandmother, Linda Nissim. Say hi.
Hello, Ruby. Hi, Ruby.
Hello.
If you want to re-record, don't worry, I've got time.
When you were a child, did something still look like a bit like war, like stuff that was happening in the war?
Yes. Yeah, it's a very good question. I'll tell you why. Because I lived with my grandparents and my brother for the first 7 years of my life. And it was just after the war, 1948. And we had books, little tiny books had grey paper in them. And on it, it was called a ration book. So we were allowed so many eggs a week, one piece of meat a week, and a certain amount of milk every week. And that was called the ration book. And I remember when they said we don't have to be on rations anymore. So that was one part of the Second World War that affected me, even though I wasn't born in the Second World War.
When they said that, what did you feel? Were you really happy?
Well, I was so young at the time. I didn't know any different. So I was just pleased to be living in a nice house with my parents and my grandparents, because I got on very, very well with my grandfather. My grandfather actually was a bit like you. He used to do handstands all the time. And we used to do handstands. Yeah, and he was 60 something at the time, and the whole family was known for doing these exercises in the garden, which always had something to do with
60 something.
Yeah, yes, my grandfather did. And that's where I started doing handstands always. And it's interesting that you're doing it as well. Now, your father never did it, unless he was in a swimming pool.
He did not. Where did you grow up?
Okay. I grew up in West London, a place called Chiswick. And my address was 7 Chiswick Lane. And I lived in this really, really big Victorian house that was on 3 floors, and it had a basement. And that's something to do with the times I was living in. There was a basement that you put coal into. So the coal man would arrive every month, and he'd walk down the side of our house and he'd pour this coal into the basement. And my grandfather used to bring it up each day and put the coal in the fire, because that's how we got our heating then. We didn't have heating in the house. And so it was all coal fired. And I remember when I used to get up in the morning to go to school, I would absolutely freeze because there was no heating. And we had these electric radiators, and my mother used to put the uniform on top of the radiator. And that's the only thing that was warm for me. Yeah. Everything else was ice cold. Can you imagine in the winter what it was like to wake up in the morning with no heating?
Excuse me. No noise while I'm having my interview. I was going to ask you, wasn't your bed? Was your bed cold?
Well, my bed actually wasn't cold. First of all, we always had a hot water bottle. We also had one of our blankets was electric. Have you heard of that? Have you heard of an electric blanket?
Never heard of an electric.
Okay, so I used to have a blanket that was attached to the wall, to the electricity, with a plug and a lead, and the blanket had wires going through it.
Yeah. And
so you'd lay it on top of you, and you'd turn the dial, and the blanket used to heat up. And you could have a dial on it to depend on how much temperature you wanted. And so all night you could either have it underneath you to lie on top of it, or have it on top of you. I used to have my heated blanket on top of me.
Okay. Very
I'll tell you
interesting.
something else. Something else during the war. We didn't have a toilet inside the house.
Oh yeah, I remember you had like toilets outside the house.
Yeah, we had one toilet outside the house, but it was a really, really posh toilet. Really posh. You went in there, and it was like you'd imagine the Queen's throne, because it was a wooden toilet. It wasn't just a toilet seat. It was a whole bench of a toilet with a hole in it, with a toilet underneath, and the toilet was white, but it had beautiful blue patterns on it. I always used to think I was Queen Victoria sitting on my grand toilet, and it didn't matter to me that I had to leave the house, walk down the alleyway, and go and sit in the toilet. But then we did get a toilet later
Well,
on.
you are family with Queen Victoria.
Absolutely, absolutely. So obviously it runs very deep in the family.
What did you like to do in your spare time?
When I was a child,
Yeah.
there was only one thing to do, because we didn't have toys. Um, the most that we would have is Lego. So you know what Lego is, don't you?
Yeah.
And we used to have Meccano sets, and they were just metal sets where you could screw things together, make tractors with them and whatever. But the main thing that we did was bicycling. We'd cycle everywhere, and every day I used to go to Chiswick Park with my mother. That's where, you know, I want my ashes thrown when I'm being cremated. You're going to take me back to my original love, where I used to sit with my mother every single day, and then we'd cycle home. So toys really didn't happen in the family. And don't forget, when I was born, we didn't have television.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yep. I had no television, and and that's another thing. This is a lovely interview. I'm enjoying this. The first time we got a television, it was because Queen Elizabeth it was her coronation. So that the first thing I ever saw on television was the Queen being crowned. So I think that's maybe
How could you see the Queen being crowned?
because that's the first big royal event ever that was televised, and black and white TV had just started, and my grandparents bought a 9-inch television. So if you imagine the screen on your computer.
That you didn't need a TV.
What
You
do you
were
mean I
there.
didn't need one?
You
I
were
was
there.
Yes. No, unfortunately I was too young, so I didn't get invited. But the screen on our television, and it was black and white, is smaller than your computer screens. And so we watched the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, and that was the first thing that I
How
saw.
big was it? Like
And that's
that big?
no, smaller.
Smaller.
9 inches, so less than 1 foot. Keep going. You see the picture behind you on the wall?
Yeah.
That was about the size of the screen, or maybe a bit smaller.
That's a lot smaller.
Yeah.
So about.
And I could tell you something. Yeah, that's it. And I'll tell you something else about the war. My bath used to be in a tin bath in the dining room. So once a week, my parents used to bring in this big tin bath, and they'd boil the kettle, and they'd fill the bath with water. And in front of the coal fire, I used to have my bath in the dining room.
Wasn't it like really boiling hot? Because you said they like.
They top. Yeah, well, they would put boiling water in to start with, and then they'd fill it up with cold water.
Oh.
So I was having bath in the dining room in a tin bath, and I would be going to the toilet outside. And my milk was delivered by horse and cart, and I used to feed the horses. Yeah, yes. We used to go out with sugar and carrots, and the horse would come every day, and we'd have our milk delivered. And then they used to poo, And then the poo used to be put on the garden to
So you
grow
were
things.
obviously never scared of horses.
No.